Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Yud Aleph. Someone just told me there was an issue with Spotify on the last daf, so if you were having an issue and you get today's daf, which you should, there was some technical issue. Daf was a problem only for Spotify, so you can listen on any other podcast channel, or you can listen straight from our website. It's up there. Okay, we're going to get started. Okay, first of all, Chodesh Tov to everybody, and Shavua Tov. Today's daf is sponsored by Emma and Richard Rimberg in honor of the engagement of their son Joseph to Shachar, daughter of Ayelet, and Amir Yefet of Shoham. Mazal Tov. We're going to get started now with the end of Daf Yud Al, where we ended at the end of Yud Amud. What we had in the Gemara there was the statement of Reish Lakish and his machloka with Rabbi Yochanan about whether a minor, whether their courtyard could accept an item, be like a kinyan for them, and they're 4 cubits, or not. So if you have a minor female, the machloka was about a female, or at least so we think, it's about a female accepting an item, and we assumed what else would we be talking about if not a get? And then we said, well, why would we have an argument to say yes or no? Because it must be, does the courtyard, chatzer, of a woman, does it acquire on her behalf? Because just like it can go in her hand, her courtyard is like an extension of her hand, and a minor has a hand, so then yes. Or do we say chatzer works because of a shlichut? Because chatzer is kind of operating like an agent. Now, a minor cannot appoint an agent because they don't have knowledge to be able to appoint an agent, and therefore chatzer wouldn't work if we say that. But the Gemara ended with this question. I'm going to go back to that line, 3 lines from the bottom. Did anybody really say that chatzer lav mishum yadei rabbi? How could you possibly say that chatzer isn't derived from the hand? Meaning everyone should agree that a ketana should be able to accept her get. And with that, we're going to reject our first understanding of this machloka Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And that's because this braita says, Yada ein li ela yada, gagach hatzara v'char pipa minayin, tamalomar v'nata mikol makom. There's a drasha that says a woman can accept her get with her hand, the pasuk says, and the hand includes not only her hand, also a courtyard, also her roof, also her enclosure. Now, what does this prove? It proves 2 things. Number 1, they learn it from Yad, but it also proves because if it was midin shlichut, you wouldn't need a drasha, because we already learned that a woman can appoint an agent to accept her get. So if chatzer worked because it was her agent, well, it already says v'shilcha mi beita, and from the word v'shilcha, they learn that she can appoint a shaliach to accept her get, which means she can do a chatzer. You wouldn't need this drasha at all. So it can't possibly be that it works mishum, that chatzer works because of shlichut, which would then get us to, well, then a minor can't do it. No, can't be. So le'inyan get kol yamalu pligi to chatzer mishum yadei rabbi. So they basically say it must be clear that chatzer is because of her yad, and therefore everyone says that a minor woman, if you throw a get into her courtyard, she will be divorced. Ki pligi. So what's the machloket? Now notice, I want you to go back. If you look further toward the top of Daf Yud, Amabet, it says, Reish Lakish says in Bardala, Ktana en la chatzer ve'en la arba amot. Never say get. A minor doesn't have chatzer, it doesn't work for her. Arba amot don't work for her. And Rabbi Yochanan says they do. So what's the topic here that they're debating? We're going to have 3 possible options. One option, number 1, ki pligi l'inyan Metzia. The whole question is, if there's a lost object of someone else's in her courtyard, does her courtyard accept the lost object? This, by the way, is going to be the topic of our next sugya that we're going to start in another 2 minutes, about a courtyard accepting a lost item. So the machloket is about Metzia. Mar savar yalfina Metzia miget, umar savar lo yalfina Metzia miget. If you say we can learn Metzia from get, then we're going to say, just like get works for a minor, which we said because it's an extension of her hand, and therefore it'll work. So it also, when it comes to Metzia, not just by get, because you could say this whole drasha of yad is specifically for get, because that was the context of the drasha. And maybe it wouldn't apply for other things like a lost item that's in her courtyard. So one holds, well, if it works for Metzia, for a get, it'll work for a lost item. And the other one holds, Reish Lakish, who says no, we don't learn from one to the other. One is a special drasha by get, and the other is a different issue. Chatzer wouldn't accept the lost item. on her behalf. Second alternative. When it comes to a minor girl, everyone agrees. Of course, if it works for get, let's try to think about it this way. What kind of crazy distinction will we make? A chatzer of a minor girl works for get, but it doesn't work for a lost item. If it works, it works. So if it works by get, we're going to apply that also to a minor girl when it comes to a lost item. Now, even though we had it worded as katana, they change it and they say, no, it was a problem in the transmission. They were really talking about a minor boy. A boy is a different story. There's no precedent for a boy's chatzer to work. There's no drasha for it from get, because boy doesn't accept the get. So, one says, well, okay, here, we have get by ktana. From there, we learn to a lost item by a ktana. From there, we learn also to a katan. And the other one says, now, we learn, we could say, okay, it works by get, it'll work for Metzia, but that's only for a girl. For a boy, it wouldn't work. Third option is actually going to say they don't even argue. Each one was talking about something else. They each were talking about something else. One was talking about get, the one who said it works, that's Rabbi Yochanan. And Reish Lakish was talking about Metzia, it doesn't work. And everybody agrees that it works for get, it doesn't work for Metzia. So they were just discussing different things. There's really no machloket. So we have three, and it's a little hard to say the sentence, but three ways to understand the machloket between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, because the third option is it's not even machloket, but three ways to understand this discussion between them. Is it a machloket? And if it's a machloket, what's the machloket about? Is it about a minor, about her Metzia, something she loses and, somebody loses and it's found in her courtyard? Or is it about a katana versus a katan? Really the machloket is about a katan. Tana, everyone agrees it would work, even for a Metzia, for a lost item, the machloket would be about a minor boy. Would that work or not? And with that, we finish that sugya. Now we're moving on to our topic for today, which is new Mishna. You see people running after a lost item. So here's the scene. I'm standing by my field, which we're going to see later. I'm definitely standing there. And you can even see it from the language because I see this going on. And here are two typical examples that we're talking about. Have to be like this. There's a deer or something in that family, whose leg is broken. So it's having trouble running and it can't run very fast. Or little chicks that haven't yet learned how to fly. And I say, here's the scene. This animal is kind of running through, but not really running very fast. And then we have a person, people chasing it, trying to catch it, meaning it's a lost item and they're just it's an ownerless item. It's in my field. I shout out the words, Zachtali Sadi, my field should acquire it. Zachtalo, it works, it's mine. Some commentaries say, even if I didn't say the word Zachtali Sadi, as we saw before, my field could acquire something. Now, before it was acquiring a get, here we're going to say perhaps it's the same thing, to acquire a lost item. Later we're going to distinguish maybe between something where someone's passing it to someone and something where it's ownerless, but we'll get there only later. So right now, there's a machloket, how to understand this Mishnah. Is it only if I say the word Zachtali Sadi, and if I don't say those words, it won't work? Or is it even if I didn't say the words? And then you have to say, well, why are the words here? They're here for the next case, which is Hayatzvi Rat Kedarko. But if you have a deer who's running very fast and isn't lame and zooms through my field and is going to go out the other side in another minute, Oshayu goes alot mafrichim. They take the two examples. Let's take a deer because the deer runs very fast, and goes alot that mafrichin, that fly, which are very hard to catch. Amar Zachtali Sadi, and I say my field will acquire these since they can run out a second later. Lo amar klum. That is not effective. It would only be a case where the item theoretically is going to end up staying in my field anyway. So now the bulk of today is going to be really on this next line. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So Gemara starts off by quoting this statement in the name of Shmuel about our Mishnah. V'husha omeh b'tzad sadehu. So I have to be standing next to my field for this to be effective. If it just goes into my field without my being nearby, it's not effective at all. So they say, why can't my field just acquire it without my being there? As Rabbi Rabbi Hanina says, I can acquire things by them coming into my courtyard without my knowledge. So if I don't need to have knowledge about it, why do I need to be standing nearby? Seems like it works anyway. So they answer, we're going to distinguish between two types of courtyards. A chatzer hamishtameret, which means it has walls on all sides and people can't get in and out easily, okay? Or chatzer she'ena mishtameret. So in a courtyard that has walls around it and things can't get in and out easily, people can't get in and out easily, it's protected. Then if you throw something into my courtyard, or a lost item gets into my courtyard acquires it. Okay, let's say, what would be the case? How could a deer with a broken leg get in to my courtyard? Let's say someone opened the door, the deer wandered in, closed the door, right? One of my workers, let's say, that deer is mine, no matter what, whether I'm there, whether I'm not there. That's not what the Mishna was talking about. The Mishna was talking about a chatzer she'ena mishtameret. Of a chatzer she'ena mishtameret, if it's open on all sides, or there's definitely ways to get in and out, then I have less ownership over anything that wanders in there, because it could also easily wander out. And therefore, I have to be next to the field. If I'm not next to the field, it's not effective. What we're going to do in this part of the shiur is try to prove this. How do we know this principle? And it's going to be a little bit complicated because we're going to quote a braita that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And the Gemara is going to say there's an internal contradiction in this braita, and then they're going to suggest a way to read it. And that way of reading it will prove our point. Then, just so I give you the structure so you know where we're going, the Gemara is then going to suggest an alternative reading that will have nothing to do with our topic and won't prove our point, but they're going to reject that alternate reading, and therefore we're going to be left with it. This is a proof. So with that introduction to this complicated section, let's get started. The topic is shechicha. The topic of this braita is when you leave sheaves in the field. Okay, so if the pasuk says, Ki tiktzur k'tzircha, I'm doing the harvesting, basadcha, in my field, v'shachachta omer basadeh, and I leave one bundle in the field, lo tashuv lekachto, I cannot go back to go get it, lager layatom v'almana yiyeh, okay, it has to be left for the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. Okay, it has to be for them. I'm not going to read the end of the pasuk, but that's the point. So now, what if there's me and there's my workers? Who has to have shechicha? Okay, so this is an interesting halacha. In order for it to be shechicha, that I have to leave it there, I have to forget it, and my workers have to forget about it. Okay, so what if we're going to now talk about? Okay, let's read inside, and then we'll see. Where do we get this from? This concept that Shmuel said, that in order for me to acquire an item, that my field acquire an item or my courtyard acquire an item, I have to be nearby. Ditanya. And as again, in a field that's open. As it says in a braita, Haya omed ba'il. If I was already in the city, first I was in my field, okay? Ve'omer, yodea ani she'omer sheyesh li basadeh, poalim shchachu, lo yehe shechicha. Okay, so now they say the following. I'm standing in the city, and I say, listen, when I left my field, I left a bundle there, but I didn't leave it on purpose. I didn't forget it. I knew it was there. I just left it for my workers to pick up. How many times do we leave things laying around the house hoping someone's going to pick them up, right? It wasn't like I forgot about it. I just was hoping they were going to pick it up. And then I went to the city. And when I was in the city, I forgot about it. Okay? So here's the braita. So the braita, again, let's just go over the words. I was standing in the city and I said, and I say, Yodea ani she'omer sheyesh li basadeh, poalim shchachu. I knew about it. And then my workers forgot it. Now, normally, the order is the owner forgot it and the workers forgot it. That would be shechicha. What if the owner knew about it, didn't forget it or leave it behind? The workers then did, and then the owner forgets about it. Yachol lo yehe shechicha. You might have thought this isn't shechicha because the order's kind of off, and the owner originally did remember it. It wasn't like it was forgotten from the beginning. You might have thought this isn't shechicha. Now, you tell me, when we start Midrash Halakha, we've been learning long enough that you should know that when we start at Midrash Halakha, which is right, we're going to basically talk about Halakha and then derive it from the Psukim. This language of you would have, Yachol lo yehe shechicha, works like you would have thought this isn't shechicha, Talmud lo mal, and then we're going to bring a pasuk that proves it is shechicha. Well, herein lies the problem. It says you might have thought it isn't shechacha, but the pasuk says v'shachachta omer basadeh. Basadeh v'shachachta v'lo ba'il. Well, the pasuk proves that what? It says you forgot the omer in the field. Now, it says specifically it's in the field, which proves that in order to be shechacha, the forgetting has to happen when you're in the field and not when you're in the city. So it's not, in fact, shechacha. Well, that is a problem because we started with, you might have thought it isn't shechacha. Talmud Lomar would usually say it is shechacha. And yet it says it's not shechacha because you were in the city when you forgot it. So something doesn't jive. So before they bring this as a proof, they point out, hagufa kashya, this braita doesn't make any sense. Amarta yachol lo yeh shechacha. From there we would infer alma, have shechacha. From there you would infer this is shechacha. V'nasiv le talmuda b'sadeh v'shachachta v'lo ba'ir. But then they prove from the pasuk that it has to be shechacha if you forget when you're in the field. But if you forgot when you're in the city, it wouldn't be shechacha. Elalav hachi kamar. So they basically say we're going to have to reread what this braita means, and we're going to have to read it like this, and that will prove our point. So let's read and see. Again, what are we trying to prove? Then in a field, okay, you have an item that's hefker, ownerless, and then it's in your field. Your field will acquire it under what circumstances? Only if you're standing by the field. If you're not standing by the field, i.e., you're in the city, then it won't work. So let's see how we get this from here. Basadeh shachuach mi'ikaro have shechacha. If you're in the field, then if you forget it from the beginning, okay, meaning I didn't remember in the beginning, I forgot entirely that this was mine. And then, I forgot that, I kind of just left it when I was doing my stuff. I didn't leave it for the workers to pick up. I forgot it. Then the workers forgot it. That will be shechacha for sure. But if I thought about it originally and I wanted my workers to pick it up and I didn't forget it, and then levasof shachuach, but then my workers forgot it and then I forgot about it, ain shechacha. Then there's no shechacha. Now here comes the proof for our halakha. My time, why? This is if I'm in the field the whole time. Because dekevan dekai gaba what happened? When my workers forgot it, even though in order for it to be real shechacha, I have to forget it also. But I remembered it in the beginning, then my workers forgot it. At that point, it becomes somewhat, okay, you're gonna have to say it becomes hefker, ownerless, because they forgot it. But it's still in my field, so my field acquired it. Okay, so because of that, what do you see here? My field acquired it. Why would that work even if I forget it later? Because I'm still in the field. Because my field can acquire something ownerless when I'm nearby. And that's the proof. As opposed to if I'm in the city. Aval ba'ir, but if I'm in the city, when they forgot, that workers forgot, my field doesn't acquire it because I'm in the city and I'm far away. Afilu zachor ulevasof shachuach have yeshechacha. That will be shechacha because I was there. I thought about it. I wanted to keep it, but then my workers forgot about it, and then I eventually forgot about it. We have the two things we need: the workers to forget and me to forget. What don't we have? Well, in between, right? If I was still in the field, there wouldn't be my workers forgetting and me forgetting, because after my workers would forget, my field would automatically acquire it again and kind of undo the forgetting of the workers. But if I'm in the city where I'm not nearby and my field therefore can't acquire it, then it's not mine. And then once I forget later, when I'm in the city, it's actually going to be shich. My time, what's the reason? Exactly this. Because I'm not nearby to acquire it. And that proves our point. How do we read this into the braita? So you could look at Rashi for that. Okay, I'll try to read through with you. Maybe you'll follow, maybe you won't. But let's read it. In the Rashi, in the city, a few lines down. This is how they read the braita. Okay, because again, both ways we're going to read this braita now. We're going to have to reread it because it didn't make sense. Yachol lo yehe shecha. You might have thought it's not shecha if you're in the city, and remember, that's what we're going to conclude. It is shecha. So Talmud lomar basadeh v'shachachta. So because it says basadeh v'shachachta, be'odcha basadeh hu de'inan deshachachte ata. It's what do you need to be in the city? You need, when you're still in the city, that's when you need to forget. Velo, meaning you have to have forgotten from the beginning. V'lo be'ir, lo be'inam v'shachachta. You don't really need to forget it because even shechat poalim oseo tashikha. Even the shikha of you need shikha in a different way in the city than you do in the field. And that's the way they read it. Okay. Anyway, either which way they're going to read it, not exactly in the simple reading. So now we're going to say that proves our point. The way we now read this braita. So the Gemara is going to suggest that maybe we could read the braita differently. Mimai, dilmuk zera katufi. Maybe what it means when it says, v'shachachta basadeh, right? Basadeh lo ba'il, maybe it means the literal way we would read it, which is basadeh nehave shikha, uba'ir lo nehave shikha. If I'm in the city, it's not shikha, the exact opposite. If I'm in the field, it's shikha, which sounds like the simple reading of the pasuk, right? It's all about shikha happening while I'm in the field. So when I forget it, when I'm in the city, it's not relevant. It's not shikha. And then, by the way, Rashi points out that you'd have to read it. You'd have to change. All you'd have to do is change one word. It would be. That's why it's a simpler reading. Yachol. We said lo yehe shikha. You might have thought when you're in the city, it's not shikha. And then the Talmud Lomar was it is. So they're going to say, and that's not what it said. The Talmud Lomar was actually it's not if you're in the city, or that's the way we originally read it. We just changed that right now. But the way they read it is yachol yehe shikha. They take out the word lo. You might have thought this is shikha, and the fact is it's not, because shikha is only when you're in the field and not when you're in the city. Which again, that reading totally negates everything we just said, or just makes it an irrelevant point. It's just saying the Torah is telling us shikha is only in the field. Shikha is not when you forget things in the city, and therefore this has nothing to do with our topic about being zochet from hefker and all that. Nothing at all. So the reason we can't read it that way is because Amar Crowd, they're now going to reject this reading. The reason you can't read it this way is because lo tashuv lekachto. It says in the pasuk, okay, again, let's read the pasuk. Ki tiktzor k'tzir chabasadeh, when you're cutting in the fields, you're reaping. V'shachachta omer basadeh, and you forgot the omer in the fields. Lo tashuv lekachto. Don't go back to get it. Go back from where? Well, it sounds like you're far away. How far away would you be? Oh, in the city. L'rabot shechachat ha'ir. So even though it said in the field twice, when it says don't go back to get it, it's telling you there's also shikha when you forgot it when you're in the city. So they say, what are you talking about? That's not what that pasuk is for. That pasuk is trying to tell you that there's a negative commandment that you've gone against. When the Torah tells you have to leave what you forgot to the poor, that's a positive commandment. But when it says you can't go back to get it, that says it's also you've transgressed a negative prohibition. So they say you could learn both. It should have just said simply, don't take it. Why did it say my lo tashuv? Don't go back. Go back sounds like you're far away. They say no. The lo tashuv is trying to teach you a different halacha. It has nothing to do with the city. Okay, which is shelefanav. This is a Mishna. Shelefanav ein shecha, shelacharav yeshecha. When you're going in the field, if you forget, Rashi says you forget to cut. Some people say it's you forget the bundles. Either which way, you start in a row, right? That's how you go through a field. You start in a row and you forget the beginning part, and then you keep going, and then you don't go all the way to the end. You forget the end part. So now the question is, which one is shecha? Both or only one? So they say. Shalacharav, something you passed already and it's behind you, that's shikha. Because it says, lo tashuv, don't go back to get it. But the one you just stopped too early, that one, shalefanav, that's in front of you, you're actually allowed to go pick up because it's not a returning. And that's what the words lo tashuv lekachto come to teach you. So that's not going to teach you anything. And zeh haklal, here's just the rule in that Mishnah, kol shu bebal tashuv, anything that you can't go back to get that's returning is shikha. You have to leave. Kol she'eino bebal tashuv, that's in front of you still, that's not shikha. So Amarav Ashi, he says, no, I still have a pasuk to include the city. The shikha in the city could be shikha, which is going to reject this whole alternative reading. Amar krat yihiyeh l'rabot shechat ha'ir. That's where it says in the pasuk. It's for the ger, the yatom and almanah yihiyeh. It just could say la ger, the yatom v'almanah. Period. It's for the ger, yatom and almanah. Why does it say yihiyeh? Will be for? It's to include an additional case of shikha, even if you forgot it in the city. So therefore, the alternative reading is no good. Therefore, this is actually used to prove that, again, it was a little complicated, but that if I didn't forget it in the beginning, I wanted my works to collect it. And then I was in the field still. When my workers forgot it, my field acquired it, which means it's no longer shechicha, even if I forget it later. But if I'm in the city and I'm far away, my field can't acquire because it can't acquire things if I'm far away. And therefore, if I was in the field and I forgot, it actually would not be shechicha. I'm sorry, wait, my field would not have acquired it. So it is shechicha when I forget it. And there is shechicha in the city. And that's what we just proved right now. Okay. Now, that was all because we started with Shmuel. The Mishna is when you're next to the field, because only when you're next to the field, if your field is open, can you acquire things from hefker. Like this thing with the shechicha, where we proved if you're standing near your field, you could acquire something from a hefker, which is after your workers forgot it, it actually becomes reacquired by you because you happen to still be in the field, and then your field acquires it. And therefore, it's not shechicha. V'chein amar Ulla, and likewise, Ulla says just like Shmuel. And now, once Ulla says this, and some other Rabbi Abba is going to question Ulla from a different Mishna. V'chein amar Ulla v'hu shomei b'tzad tzedei, who says the exact same thing as Shmuel. And in fact, v'chein amar Rabba bar Hana v'hu shomei b'tzad tzedei, he also says the exact same thing. Eitive Rabbi Abba le'Ulla. So now comes Rabbi Abba with a question on Ulla, and this is a Mishnah we already learned. Maaser in Kiddushin, Maaser Rabban Gamliel uskenim shayu ba'im b'sfina. Case, there's a lot of cases with Rabban Gamliel and the rabbis on a boat. This time they're on a boat. There was one case where there was a case with the etrog. He gave them all their etrog, his etrog. Same rabbis, by the way. So let's see. I'm Rabban Gamliel. Now, Rabban Gamliel is there. How many times do you go on a trip and all of a sudden you remember, oh no, I forgot to bring this. I forgot to take care of that at home, right? And then you immediately, try to WhatsApp and get in communication. Well, Rabban Gamliel couldn't do that. So he was on a boat and remembered that he didn't tithe his produce. And now he realizes his family is going to eat untithed produce possibly. So he wants to tithe his produce while he's really far away. How's he going to do that? So he happens to have a Levi with him, and he happens to have a poor person with him. It was in the years where Maaser Sheni, in the 3rd and 6th year of the cycle, instead of Maaser Sheni bringing it to Jerusalem, you would redeem it on a coin and all that, you give it to the poor people. So it was one of those years. So he has Rabbi Akiva, who according to the commentaries, he was a Gabbai Tzedakah. He was in charge of giving out the charity. So he could give the charity part to tithe to him. He must have given the part away to the Kohanim already, because he's not talking about the Kohanim part, the Truma. But the Maaser he gives to a Levi, who's Rabbi Yehoshua. How can he give it? He's not there. How could he separate it? So first of all, this is all based on braita, which we're not going to talk about today, but that you can do retroactive designation, okay? Which is basically, he's going to say, we'll read it right now, is Amar Rabban Gamliel, Isul shani atid lamod, natun li Yehoshua. A tenth that I will when I get home. I'll take a tenth when, in other words, he must have known how much there is because you have to measure a tenth. So when I get home, I'll measure out a tenth. I know exactly what it is. Let's say he has 100% right now. Okay. And let's say when he gets back, there'll be 50% of the produce left. So he'll take, of that 50, he'll take, the tenth, it would have been a tenth of 100. He'll separate it later. Okay, the assumption is, first of all, we know Rabban Gamliel was wealthy. So he had enough produce that he wasn't worried his family was going to eat everything. If they were going to eat everything, this wouldn't work. But he knows that something will be left. So he says, when I get home, I'll take, X amount, whatever a tenth of the whole thing is now, and I'll give it to you, Yehoshua, but I'm giving it to you now, as if you have rights to it now. Now, the whole question is, and this is why it's going to connect with our topic, how is he going to gain rights to this? Well, he says to him, turning out Amabet, and I'm renting you. Okay, give me some money right now. With that money, I will rent you a little piece of land in my property. And through that, you will acquire the Maaser, because you can't do a kinyan on the metaltalim right now. You have to do mashicha, pull it, lift it, pass it. There has to be something. So what will I do? I'll give you the land. And with that land, you'll acquire the produce in the land. Okay, I'll give you like a small piece of land, and with that, I can help you acquire the produce. And another tenth that I'm going to do in the future. Akiva ben Yosef. And he will acquire it on behalf of the people because he's in charge of the tzedakah money. And he gives him this portion of the land. So now, the question is, right now, Rabban Gamliel gave them, the assumption. You have to make a few assumptions here, and that's why we're going to read this in a bunch of different ways. Okay, but right now we're going to read it one way, which is with Rabbi Abba's glasses. Rabbi Abba wants to contradict this halacha that what? Ulla said, and Shmuel and Rabbi Abba Hana, that when you have something ownerless, now the assumption is right now that this is now ownerless, the Maaser, because it's not exactly ownerless, but it's like ownerless because once Rabban Gamliel separates it, which he just did theoretically, right, in his mind, but once it's separated, it no longer belongs to Rabban Gamliel, right? It's not his anymore. It's for the Levi. Now, what Levi? Well, any Levi. There's no particular Levi. So it's kind of ownerless. It's somewhat ownerless. It's not exactly hefker entirely, but it is ownerless. Now, what right does Rabban Gamliel reserve to this? Well, he can decide who he wants to give it to, right? That's his choice. That we'll call later Tobat Hana'ah. We've seen that before, but let's leave that aside right now. So the assumption is he's now giving it to them. By what method, by what mechanism? It's something that's kind of ownerless, and he's giving them a field, and their field is going to acquire the ownerless item because it's now in their field, like we've been discussing. If you put something in someone's field, they acquire it. So now they're going to say, how Rabbi Abba says, "V'chi Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Akiva." I'm sorry, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Akiva. Bitzad Sadeu Rabban Gamliel Yomdim. Were they standing right next to the field? Obviously not. They were in a boat. So must be, it works even without standing right next to it. You can acquire a hefker item, an ownerless item, without being there. Well, let's see Ulla's response to this difficulty. Amarle, dame haim rabbanan kidelo gamri inashishma. This guy, he doesn't call him by name, I guess not to insult him anymore, clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, and leaves it at that. He doesn't even explain himself. Okay, so what we want to know what the issue is. So the Gemara is going to continue and tell us why Ulla didn't really think this was a problem or why others didn't think this was a difficulty. And we're going to have basically two approaches to the answer. Ki'ata l'sura. Now, Rabbi Abba goes to Surah after this. And he tells them this story. Hachi amar Ulla b'hachu utvite. Says, this is what Ulla says, and this is what I raised a difficulty on, as if trying to say, what do you think of my difficulty? He doesn't say, and Ulla laughed at me. But he just says, and this is what I said. Amar lehu le'ahume Rabbanan. Well, some of the rabbis said to Rabbi Abba, you got it all wrong. Rabban Gamliel, how did he do this? It wasn't hefker and, their courtyard acquired it even though they weren't there. Rabban Gamliel metatale agav mikarke eknelam. Remember we learned about a kinyan agav? We actually saw this a few dapim ago, that you can acquire nechasim she'en lehem achrayut, which are movable possessions that don't come with a warranty, with items that have a warranty, with land. So basically that means, what happened? They gave him money. You can acquire land through money. You can't acquire metaltalim through money. You have to pull them or lift them or something. But you can acquire land through money. So they gave him money. With that, they acquired the land. And with the land, they acquired also the movables that he was trying to give them, the grain or whatever it was. So that's why it works. In other words, he was giving them, now, in order to explain this, you have to say that he still owned the Maaser, because how can you give over something, right? He was doing a kinyan on something that he owned, which was the Maaser. So you could say, now this is a bit of a question, does he own it, does he not? I kind of called it ownerless before, but it's not exactly ownerless, because he still can choose who he wants to give it to. So that means he has monetary rights to it, or maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, and that's what we're going to see right now. So this answer is a bit of a weak answer because we're going to see it really sort of depends on how you view that. So Rabbi Zera kabla, Rabbi Abba lo kabla. So Rabbi Zera accepted, Rabbi Zera wasn't in the picture before, but apparently he was in the yeshiva when the guy said this, and he accepted this answer. Rabbi Abba didn't accept the answer though. And Rava is going to show why it makes sense that Rabbi Abba didn't accept the answer, although we're going to reject Rava. Amar Rava, Shapir Avid de lo kibla. He was right for not accepting this answer. And he proves it in the following way. If really you're going to view the Maaser as Rabban Gamliel's property, that he can now pass on to them through this kinyan agav, well then, why did he have to give them land? He could have done it in a much simpler manner. If it really is owned by him, and he can pass it on to them, what's the easiest way to do it if it's not in front of us? Couldn't he have done a handkerchief kinyan? And even if he didn't have a handkerchief, he could use a shirt. He could, right? We've been talking about a kinyan suda. All you have to do is, right, you can barter things. So you can also do a symbolic barter. Give him a handkerchief, let them lift it. They even can give it back to him. Ultimately, just for the kinyan, you basically lift it up. That would have been a much better way to acquire it. right, to pass on ownership of the Maaser, that he doesn't have to start renting them land in his property. Now, therefore, comes Rav and he says, it must be, it can't be that you can acquire tovat hana'ah. In other words, as I said before, what rights does Rabban Gamliel have for the Maaser once he separates it? Again, he only separated it in words, but it still was considered separated at that point because of din breira, which we're not going to get into right now. But the point is, the fact that he can choose which lady to give it to or which poor person to give it to, that's just a small benefit he has. That's not enough considered his own, because it's really owned right now by all the Levites, one of the Maasers, and the other tithe is owned by all the poor people. So that's not really his anymore. All he has is the rights to pass on, right? That he can choose who he wants to give it to, which to him is worth a little bit because then they owe him a favor, so to speak, or they'll, potentially owe him a favor. That's not something you can pass on through chalipin, which means if you can't pass it on through chalipin, you can't do a kinyan on something that's not really yours. It's just this little bit of tovat hana'ah. You can't do a kinyan agav either because it's not his. Okay. So therefore, it can't be at work through a kinyan agav, comes Rabba, which then proves why Rabbi Abba didn't accept that answer, which means we're back to square one, which is Rabbi Abba's right. This seems to be a kinyan, and they weren't, that their chatzer acquired it, not kinyan agav, just because it's in their property, and they weren't standing nearby, so it looks like it works anyway. You have to assume, by the way, that Rabban Gamliel's chatzer was not mishna, it wasn't protected, otherwise this wouldn't be a question. That's a side point. So now, they say, Velohi, but they're going to reject Rava's answer here. Matnot kuna nitina ktiva behu. It says in the Torah, you give the stuff to the Kohen. Now, if you're giving something, it means it's yours. So it actually is considered your property. And this is an interesting debate. Once you separate the tithes, is it yours, is it not? The Gemara says it really is yours, but now they still have to explain the whole premise of the question, which was why doesn't chalipin work and why does kinyan agav work? Okay, and then the answer is going to be it's a kinyan agav and it has nothing to do with our situation and therefore it's not a question. Well, because chalipin is derech mekahu memkahu. Metaltalin agav mekarke netina alimtehi. This is interesting. This is distinguishing between two types of kinyanim. A kinyan chalipin, this handkerchief, is like a barter kind of kinyan. You take this in place of this. That's only done in a sale. That's not done when it's a one-sided, I'm giving you something. So in matnot kuna, it's I'm giving you something. That can work with the kinyan agav, because I can give you land, and with that, I can have you acquire things there. But if we're doing a back and forth, a chalipin, like a sale, this is not a sale. This is a giving over of a gift kind of thing. A sale can't be done. A sale can be done with chalipin. A gift can't be done with chalipin. So therefore, the chalipin didn't work. That's why they didn't use chalipin and they used kinyan agav. So we're back to saying it's a kinyan agav and therefore resolve the question according to Ulla against Ulla, because it's not at all what you thought it was, which is it's hefker that your field is acquiring through hefker, and if you're not on the side of your field, it won't work. This wasn't hefker. This was owned by Rabban Gamliel, and he passed it on to them through a kinyan agav. Nothing to do with it. That's one possible answer. Rav Papa gives a second answer, which actually relates to things we've seen already in this Masechet, which I think is a very interesting theme to think about. Rav Papa Amar Dat Acheret Makneo Tanshani. Our Mishna was talking about what kind of case? A case where there's an animal running through my field and I want to acquire them. If I'm not standing next to my field, I can't acquire it because it's much harder, right? You think something ownerless is much easier to acquire. And I think that's what our Masechet is starting off by telling us. It's not. Something ownerless is actually harder to acquire. Why? Because there's no one else passing it to me. There's no dat acheret. When there's another person on the other side, here it's Rabban Gamliel is passing on to Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva something. To do that, they don't need to be next to the field. He can do it by saying, here's a field, it's yours, and then your field can acquire it. And it actually works like Rabbi Abba viewed it as working, not a kinyan agav. But yes, the field can acquire this ownerless, this item. Even if we call it ownerless, it doesn't matter, because in this case, there's someone else passing it to you. It's much easier to acquire something when there's two people and one is giving it to the other. So the one accepting has to do less because someone's passing it to them. Whereas if I'm acquiring something ownerless and there's nobody passing it to me, and we've already talked about this topic in our Masechet, it's much more difficult. And that's why it only works if I'm standing near my field. That's a very interesting distinction. So Minatamra, where do we get this distinction from? Ditnan, our Mishna. And this discussion we're going to see on our Mishna. So we have our Mishna. They're running after this ownerless item. You actually have to catch up to them to be able to do it. But then Rabbi Yirmiyah, after he quoted Rabbi Yochanan as saying this, he said, but would that be the same for a gift? If someone drops a gift, an animal in my field, and then it starts running, do I have to catch up to it in order for it to be mine? Or is the fact that they put it in my field already acquired by me? To which, Kibla Mine Rabbi Abba bar Kahana, he said, you're right. You could chase this animal, and even if you don't reach the animal, it doesn't matter. It's yours. Why is that? In other words, he accepts the distinction between a gift and ownerless property. My time at Lav Mishum Dedat Acheret Makneo Tam Shani. Why did he agree with him? Because isn't it because there's someone else passing it over to you? It's much easier. You don't have to reach the animal. When someone passes you something, it's much easier to acquire it in your field. You don't have to be nearby. And that's the case of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva. But if it's running through your field, if you don't catch up to it, and likewise, if you're not standing nearby, it's not. So there's that distinction. The Gemara is going to have a question on this distinction. And with this, we'll end today's daf. Amarle Rav Shmuel Rav Papa. Hare get. But wait, what's get? A get is a man gives a wife a get. Right? A husband gives his wife a get. Didad acheret makneota. There is someone else. Now, what would you say then? He could put it in her courtyard. And according to everything we learned, she doesn't need to be there because there's someone else passing it to her. So it's easier for her to acquire it by her courtyard. Well, Amar Ulla, who's our guy that we've been questioning here, she has to be there. So So what do you see here? Why does she have to be there? If there's someone else passing it to her, according to everything we just said, she doesn't need to be there. And Ulla only required it in a case like our Mishnah, where it's hefker, it's ownerless. So they say Shani get to ita ba'al korcha. Get is easier for her to. Get is different. She actually has to be there because he can give her a get against her will. And therefore, she needs to be there. It wasn't me he gave her a get against her will. That was the law in the Talmudic times, changed with Takanat Rabbeinu Gershom. Means women have to accept a get. If a woman doesn't accept a get, it's not a get. But in those days, she did. We learned a lot about this in Gittin. In any case, the point is, because she has to, because she can, the get will be hers even against her will. Therefore, she at least needs to be standing there. It's not so clear the logic here, and the Gemara is going to question the logic and say it's the opposite. That and this is where we'll end with. But lav kavachomer, wouldn't it be al kavachomer the opposite? Uma get ite bal korche. A get is obviously easy to give to her because you can give it to her even against her will, and yet she has to be standing there. If she's not standing there, it doesn't work. Matana de midate lokoshakin. A matana, which if someone gives you a gift that you don't want, it's not yours. You didn't accept it. So there is no such thing as a gift against your will. So wouldn't you think a gift, all the more so, you would have to, that you would have to be standing there because you have to show that you want to accept it. If a get can be against her will, then it sounds like she doesn't even need to be there. So we're going to have to deal with this get problem. But basically what we've proven here is that there's a distinction between when someone else is giving you something, other than we're going to have to deal with the get issue, where you don't have to be there, versus if it's hefker and it's ownerless, there's no one on the other side, you're going to need to be standing. So basically the review of our daf is pretty simple. We resolved the issue of Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, and what we did mainly was two things. We dealt with this Mishnah, this animal running through, your chatzer acquires it if, again, it's a chatzer that's not protected, but you're standing nearby, according to Shmuel and Ulla. And unless the animal can easily get out, then no. But if yes, then yes. But you have to be standing nearby. We brought a proof for Shmuel that you have to be standing nearby. We tried to reject the proof, but we're unsuccessful from the braita of Shikha. Then we brought Ulla, who said the same thing, and Rabbi Abba, who raised a question from the Rabban Gamliel story. So then we gave two possible distinctions. Either it's a kinyan agav, or it's different because even though theoretically it's somewhat ownerless, it's still there's someone else passing it on. And that makes it already easier that you don't need to be standing near your field. And that was one thing that we just raised a question about from get, which we haven't resolved yet. With that, we'll finish today's daf, wishing everyone a good day, a Shavua Tov and a Chodesh Tov. And maybe this will be a Chodesh that will bring good news for us that we've been waiting for a long time for. Have a good day.